It all began with a single text message. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at the screen to see a notification from my bank. Large transaction flagged for review. Please confirm if this was you. My heart skipped a beat. I had just been promoted to a senior position at work, and while I had celebrated modestly, I hadn't made any significant purchases. I called the bank immediately. After a frustrating series of automated menus, I was connected to a representative who confirmed that an expensive luxury handbag had been charged to my card, a card I hadn't used in weeks. Confused and slightly irritated, I texted my wife, Anna, asking if she knew anything about it. Her reply was immediate but evasive. "We'll talk when you get home." That night, as I walked through the door, I noticed something strange. Our living room was unusually cluttered with shopping bags, some from high-end boutiques I knew we could barely afford even with my recent pay raise. Anna greeted me with a wide smile, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. "What's all this?" I asked, gesturing at the bags. "Just a little celebration," she replied nonchalantly. "You got promoted, so I thought we could finally start living a bit more comfortably." My stomach churned. While we weren't struggling financially, my promotion came with added responsibilities, and I'd planned to save most of the extra income for emergencies and future investments. "Anna, we talked about this. We agreed to stick to our budget, even after the promotion." Her face darkened. "So what? I'm supposed to keep living like we're barely getting by while you're out there climbing the corporate ladder?" I didn't know what to say. This wasn't like her. Anna had always been the pragmatic one in our relationship, the one who scolded me for impulsive purchases. What had changed? The weeks that followed were tense. Anna's spending didn't stop, and while I tried to address it calmly, our conversations always spiraled into heated arguments. She accused me of being controlling, and I accused her of being reckless. The turning point came when I discovered she'd secretly taken out a loan in my name. I found out by accident. Another notification from the bank alerted me to a significant deduction from my account. When I called to inquire, the representative informed me that it was the first installment on a loan I hadn't authorized. My blood ran cold. After pressing them for details, I learned that the loan had been used to purchase a property. When I confronted Anna, she didn't deny it. Instead, she acted as though it was the most natural thing in the world. "It's an investment," she said with a shrug. "Real estate always appreciates in value. You'll thank me later." I was livid. "In my name? Without telling me? How could you do this?" "You would have just said no," she snapped. "So I did what I had to do. Stop acting like I'm some kind of criminal. This is for us, for our future." I felt like I was staring at a stranger. This wasn't the woman I'd married, the woman I'd planned to spend the rest of my life with. I didn't know what to do. The property she'd bought was an overpriced vacation home in a location we'd never even discussed visiting. It made no sense, financially or otherwise. And now, I was saddled with a massive debt I hadn't agreed to. Things only got worse from there. I started noticing other red flags. She'd become secretive about her phone, constantly taking calls in hushed tones and stepping out of the room whenever I walked in. Our mutual friends began acting strangely around me, offering awkward smiles and quickly changing the subject whenever Anna came up. One day, I decided to dig deeper. While Anna was out, I went through her desk and found a stack of documents related to the property purchase. Buried among them was a receipt for a luxury car I hadn't known about, registered in her name but paid for with the same loan tied to my account. My hands trembled as I stared at the papers. What else had she been hiding? The next bombshell dropped when a man showed up at our door claiming to be a real estate agent. He was there to deliver keys to another property, a second one I'd had no knowledge of. At this point, I felt like my entire life was spiraling out of control. Who was this person I'd married? And why was she dragging us into financial ruin? I knew I had to act, but I wasn't prepared for what I'd uncover next. The deeper I dug, the more tangled the web became. Anna's purchases weren't just impulsive. They were part of something much larger, something I couldn't have imagined in my wildest nightmares. The moment I decided to involve a lawyer was when I realized I could no longer trust Anna. The financial chaos she had created wasn't just a result of poor decisions. It felt deliberate. I scheduled an appointment and brought every document I could find. The lawyer's expression grew graver with each piece of evidence I laid on the desk. After an hour of reviewing the paperwork, he leaned back and said, "This isn't just reckless spending. There's intent here, and not in your favor." His words sent a chill down my spine. He explained that Anna's actions could potentially put me in a dire legal situation if I didn't act quickly. Loans in my name, property transactions I hadn't approved. If left unchecked, this could spiral into financial and legal ruin. I returned home that evening with a mix of dread and determination. Anna was in the kitchen, humming to herself like nothing was wrong. I tried to bring up the topic calmly, hoping to get some clarity on why she had done all this. But as soon as I mentioned the lawyer, her demeanor shifted. The calm, collected Anna I thought I knew disappeared, replaced by someone cold and defensive. "You hired a lawyer? To go against me?" she said, her voice low but menacing. "Is this what our marriage has come to? Anna, you put us in this position. You didn't consult me about anything. You took out loans in my name and bought properties I didn't agree to. How do you expect me to react?" Her face twisted into a smirk. "You think you're so innocent? You think you're the victim here? Maybe you should look in the mirror." Her response left me stunned. I didn't know what she was insinuating, but I couldn't let her deflect. I pressed her further, demanding answers, but she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. That night, I slept in the guest room, too angry and confused to share a bed with her. The next day, I decided to investigate the property she had purchased. Using the address from the documents I found, I drove to the location of the vacation home. It was a gaudy, oversized mansion in a gated community, a far cry from the modest lifestyle we had agreed upon. The real estate agent who had delivered the keys was there, showing the property to a couple. When I introduced myself, he seemed hesitant to speak to me. "I'm sorry, but this property is no longer under your name," he said. "What do you mean?" "My wife purchased it with a loan tied to my account." He hesitated, then admitted, "The ownership was transferred last week. I believe it was sold to a private buyer." "Sold? Without my knowledge?" The implications hit me like a freight train. Not only had Anna bought this mansion without consulting me, but she had also sold it behind my back. Where had the money gone? What was she doing with these transactions? I returned home, more determined than ever to get to the bottom of this. I confronted Anna as soon as she walked through the door. Her reaction was unexpected. Instead of denying it, she laughed. "You're finally catching on, aren't you?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Took you long enough." "Anna, what the hell is going on? Why are you doing this?" Her expression shifted to something I can only describe as contempt. "You wouldn't understand. You're so busy playing the perfect husband, the responsible provider, but you don't see the bigger picture." "What bigger picture?" "You're ruining us, Anna." She didn't respond. Instead, she walked upstairs and locked herself in our bedroom. I felt a growing sense of helplessness. The woman I had married was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. And the worst part was, I still didn't know why. Over the next few days, I focused on gathering more evidence. I requested detailed bank statements, combed through old emails, and even hired a private investigator. What he uncovered was even more shocking than I could have imagined. Anna wasn't just spending recklessly. She was deeply involved in a series of shady business deals, multiple properties, offshore accounts, and even ties to a fraudulent investment scheme. The investigator also discovered something else. Anna had been meeting regularly with a man I didn't recognize. He provided me with photos of them together at a restaurant, at what appeared to be an office, and even outside one of the properties she had purchased. The man looked older, well-dressed, and carried an air of authority. Who was he? And what was his connection to Anna? I decided to confront her one last time. I waited until she was home, then laid out everything I had discovered. The documents, the photos, the evidence of her involvement in fraudulent activities. "Explain this," I said, my voice steady but firm. Anna glanced at the evidence, then back at me. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You were never supposed to find out," she said quietly. "Find out what? That you've been lying to me? That you've been dragging us into this mess for what? Money? Status?" "It's not that simple," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then make it simple," I demanded. Tell me the truth. She hesitated, then finally said, I had no choice. They made me do it. Who? Who made you do it? She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her keys and walked out the door, leaving me alone with more questions than answers. At that moment, I realized this was far from over. Whatever Anna had gotten herself into, it was bigger than I had anticipated. And now, I was caught in the middle of it. After Anna stormed out, I didn't hear from her for 2 days. I called and texted repeatedly, but she didn't respond. Her silence wasn't just frustrating. It was alarming. I didn't know if she had run away, if she was in danger, or if she was simply trying to avoid me. My concern for her safety warred with my anger at the mess she had created. Each passing hour without contact added to the tension. On the 3rd day, I received an unexpected call from the private investigator I had hired. He sounded anxious. You need to meet me. Now, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He directed me to a small coffee shop on the outskirts of town. I arrived within the hour, scanning the room until I spotted him sitting at a corner table. He gestured for me to sit down, his face unusually pale. There's more to this than I initially thought, he began, sliding a folder across the table. Take a look. Inside were more photos and documents, but these weren't just about Anna. They included information about the man she had been meeting, his name, background, and connections. His name was Victor Kovacs, a high-ranking figure in a notorious real estate and investment scheme that had defrauded hundreds of people out of millions of dollars. The scheme involved fake property deals, shell companies, and elaborate money laundering operations. It was the kind of thing that made headlines when the authorities eventually caught wind of it. But that wasn't all. The investigator had also uncovered something even more shocking. Anna wasn't just a participant. She was listed as an executive in one of the shell companies tied to Victor. Her name was on contracts, bank accounts, and even property deeds. This wasn't some accidental entanglement. She was deeply involved. My head spun as I absorbed the information. How long has this been going on? I asked, my voice barely steady. Based on the records, at least a year, the investigator replied. She's been keeping this from you for a long time. I couldn't wrap my head around it. The Anna I knew had always been cautious, even overly so. How had she ended up in the middle of something so dangerous? And why had she dragged me into it without my knowledge? The investigator interrupted my thoughts. There's one more thing. I don't think she's just a participant. I think she's being used. He pointed to a series of transactions in the documents. They showed large sums of money being funneled through accounts in Anna's name, but the final destinations were tied to Victor and his associates. This pattern suggests she might be a front. They're using her as a buffer to keep their names clean. The possibility that Anna was being manipulated didn't make me feel any better. It only added to the urgency. If she was caught, she would take the fall for everything. And with the evidence tying me to the loans and properties, I could get dragged down with her. I asked the investigator to keep digging and left the coffee shop feeling more overwhelmed than ever. When I got home, I found an envelope taped to the front door. My name was written on it in Anna's handwriting. I tore it open and found a single sheet of paper with a short, cryptic message. Meet me at the old factory on 9th Street tonight. Come alone. The old factory was an abandoned building on the outskirts of town, a place that had been shut down for years. I had no idea why she wanted to meet there, but I didn't have much choice. If this was my chance to get answers, I had to take it. That night, I drove to the factory, parking a block away to avoid drawing attention. The area was desolate, the only light coming from a flickering street lamp near the entrance. As I approached, I saw Anna standing just inside the building, her arms crossed and her expression tense. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. You came, she said, her voice flat. I want answers, Anna. No more games. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. I owe you that much. We sat down on an old bench, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. For the first time, she looked genuinely remorseful. It started with Victor, she began. I met him at a networking event last year. He made everything sound so legitimate. He said he could help us invest, grow our money, secure our future. I thought I was doing something good for us. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger in check. And when did it stop being good? She hesitated. A few months in, I realized something was off. The deals didn't add up. The properties were overpriced, the transactions too complicated. But by then, I was in too deep. Victor had me sign documents, open accounts. He said it was standard procedure, but now I see he was using me. Why didn't you tell me? I demanded. Why keep this a secret? I was scared, she admitted. Victor isn't just a businessman. He has connections, people who do his dirty work. When I tried to back out, he threatened me. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd come after you. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. And the loans in my name? The properties? Was that his idea too? She nodded. He said it would keep things from looking suspicious, that it was temporary. I didn't think he'd actually follow through, but once the money started moving, I couldn't stop it. I felt a surge of frustration and helplessness. Do you have any idea what you've done to us? We could lose everything, Anna. Our home, our savings, everything. I know, she said, her voice cracking. That's why I'm trying to fix it. Fix it how? She reached into her bag and pulled out a USB drive. This has everything. Records, transactions, names. It's enough to bring Victor down. But I can't go to the authorities. If he finds out, he'll kill me. He'll kill us. The gravity of the situation was suffocating. I took the USB drive, realizing that this was now bigger than just us. Victor was dangerous, and exposing him wouldn't just ruin him. It would put a target on our backs. Before I could respond, Anna's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and her face paled. We need to go, she said urgently. They know I'm here. Anna's panic was palpable as she grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the side exit of the factory. I didn't ask questions. Her fear was enough to make me move without hesitation. As we hurried out, I glanced over my shoulder and caught a glimpse of two men entering through the front. They were tall, dressed in dark clothing, and moving with purpose. There was no doubt in my mind. They were looking for Anna. We slipped through a side door and out into the night. Anna led me to an alley behind the factory where her car was parked. Without a word, she unlocked the doors, and we got in. As she started the engine, I noticed her hands trembling. She pulled onto the main road, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds. Who were they? I asked, breaking the tense silence. Victor's men, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. They've been following me ever since I started asking questions. Why didn't you tell me sooner? My frustration was boiling over, but I tried to keep my voice steady. I thought I could handle it, she said. I didn't want to drag you into this mess. You dragged me in the moment you put those loans in my name. I shot back. You can't keep making decisions for both of us without telling me. She didn't respond, her focus entirely on the road ahead. I could tell she was trying to keep her composure, but the cracks were starting to show. It was clear she was terrified, and for the first time, I started to grasp the full extent of the danger we were in. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, though it was probably no more than 30 minutes. Anna finally pulled into the parking lot of a rundown motel on the edge of town. She parked the car and turned to me. We can't go home, she said. They'll be watching the house. What's the plan then? I asked. We can't just keep running. She hesitated before answering. We need to get this to someone who can do something about it. The police, the FBI, someone who can stop Victor. And how do we do that without getting caught? I pressed. They're clearly watching you, and now they'll be watching me too. She didn't have an answer. The reality was, we were in over our heads. The evidence on the USB drive might be enough to bring Victor down, but getting it into the right hands without exposing ourselves was another matter entirely. We checked into the motel under fake names, paying in cash to avoid leaving a paper trail. The room was small and dingy, with peeling wallpaper and a faint smell of mildew, but it would have to do. As we sat on the edge of the bed, I pulled out the USB drive and stared at it. What exactly is on here? I asked. Everything, Anna said. Transaction records, contracts, emails. Victor was arrogant. He thought he was untouchable, so he didn't bother covering his tracks. If that's true, then this is a smoking gun, I said. But it's also a death sentence if it falls into the wrong hands. Anna nodded, her expression grim. That's why we have to be careful. Victor has people everywhere. He'll know the moment we try to hand this over. We spent the rest of the night going over our options. Anna suggested contacting a journalist she had once met at a charity event, a woman known for exposing corruption and taking down powerful figures. It was a risky move, but it seemed like our best shot. The authorities might be compromised, and going to them could backfire. A journalist, on the other hand, could use the evidence to shine a light on Victor's operations and force the authorities to act. The next morning, I made the call. The journalist, whose name was Rachel Hayes, answered after a few rings. I explained the situation as vaguely as possible, avoiding specifics over the phone. She was cautious at first, but when I mentioned Victor's name, her tone changed. "Bring me what you have," she said, "but be careful. If what you're saying is true, you're both in serious danger." We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a public park in the middle of the city. The idea was to make the handoff in broad daylight, where there would be plenty of witnesses. It felt safer than meeting in some secluded spot where Victor's men could corner us. Anna and I left the motel later that morning, taking every precaution to avoid being followed. We switched cars twice, taking routes that made no sense, doubling back and circling blocks until we were confident no one was tailing us. When we finally arrived at the park, Rachel was already there, sitting on a bench with a book in her hands. The transfer was quick. I handed her the USB drive, and she slipped it into her bag without missing a beat. "I'll go through this and let you know what I find," she said. "In the meantime, lay low. If Victor's as dangerous as you say, he won't take this lying down." Her words proved prophetic. That night, back at the motel, there was a knock at the door. Anna and I froze, exchanging a look of dread. I peered through the peephole and saw two men standing outside, different from the ones at the factory, but just as menacing. "We know you're in there," one of them said. "Open the door, and no one gets hurt." Anna grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with panic. "We have to go." I nodded, quickly gathering our things while she opened the window. The room was on the ground floor, which made our escape easier, but it also meant we had limited time before they realized we weren't going to open the door. We slipped out into the night, running toward the tree line behind the motel. I heard the door splinter behind us as the men broke it down, but we didn't stop. We ran until we couldn't hear their voices anymore, our lungs burning and our hearts pounding. When we finally stopped to catch our breath, Anna turned to me, her face pale. "This isn't going to end until he's taken down," she said. She was right, and as much as I hated to admit it, we weren't safe yet. Victor was still out there, and he wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. We didn't sleep that night. After escaping into the woods, we kept moving, sticking to back roads and deserted paths, unsure if Victor's men were still pursuing us. Anna's nerves were on edge, and I couldn't blame her. Every sound, a snapping branch, the hum of a distant car, felt like a potential threat. We eventually reached a small gas station on the outskirts of another town, where we used a payphone to call Rachel. She picked up after several rings, her voice a mixture of concern and urgency. "I've gone through the files," she said. "You weren't exaggerating. This is enough to take Victor down, but it also implicates several high-profile figures, politicians, executives, even law enforcement. You two need to disappear for a while. Things are about to get messy." Disappear? The word hit me like a punch. We were already running, but Rachel was suggesting something far more permanent. I glanced at Anna, who was leaning against the wall of the gas station, her face pale and drawn. She had put us in this situation, but now we were both caught in a web far beyond anything we could have imagined. "Do you have a safe place to go?" Rachel asked. "No," I admitted. "We've been moving from motel to motel." There was a pause. "I have a contact who can help. He specializes in situations like this, getting people out, giving them new identities. It won't be easy, and it won't be cheap, but it's your best chance." I relayed the information to Anna, who nodded silently. At this point, we didn't have any other options. Rachel provided the details of her contact, a man named Marcus, who operated out of a small office in an industrial area 2 towns over. She assured us he was trustworthy, but the idea of putting our lives in the hands of a stranger didn't sit well with me. Still, we didn't have the luxury of being picky. We reached Marcus's office the next day after another series of car switches and circuitous routes. The building was nondescript, with no signs or markings to indicate what kind of business was conducted inside. Marcus himself was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his 50s, with a calm demeanor that suggested he had seen it all before. "You're in a bad spot," he said after we explained our situation. "But it's not impossible to fix. If you're serious about disappearing, I can make it happen. New names, new documents, everything you need to start over." "How long will it take?" I asked. "Not long, but you'll need to lay low until everything is ready. I have a safe house where you can stay in the meantime." Anna looked at me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. I knew what she was thinking. Starting over meant leaving behind everything we had built, everything we knew. But staying meant risking our lives. There was no real choice. "We'll do it," I said. Marcus nodded and handed us a set of keys and an address. "Go there. Don't contact anyone. Don't use your real names. I'll be in touch when everything is ready." The safe house was a small cabin in a remote wooded area, far from any major roads or towns. It was sparse but functional, with just enough supplies to last us for a few weeks. The isolation was suffocating, but it was also our only refuge. We spent the days in uneasy silence, waiting for word from Marcus and constantly scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. As the days turned into weeks, the tension began to take its toll. Anna and I argued more frequently, the stress of our situation amplifying every minor disagreement. But beneath the surface, I could see how deeply she regretted everything that had happened. One night, as we sat by the dim light of a single lantern, she finally opened up. "I never wanted this," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought I was helping us, building something for our future. But I was blind. I let greed and fear control me, and now we're paying the price." Her words were raw, and for the first time in weeks, I saw the woman I had married, the one who had always cared so deeply about our lives together. I didn't know how to respond. Forgiveness felt impossible, but so did holding on to my anger. We were both trapped, and if we didn't find a way to move forward together, we wouldn't survive. A week later, Marcus finally called. "It's done," he said. "You'll need to come back to the office to pick everything up. Bring only what you can carry." The thought of returning to civilization, even briefly, was nerve-wracking. But we followed his instructions, arriving at his office under the cover of night. Marcus handed us a set of documents, new IDs, passports, and even a small amount of cash to get us started. He explained that he had arranged for a driver to take us to a new location where we could begin our new lives. "Once you leave here, you can't look back," he said. "No calls, no emails, nothing. As far as the world is concerned, you no longer exist." It was a sobering thought, but it was the only way to ensure our safety. We thanked Marcus and followed the driver to a waiting car. As we drove away, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and sadness. Our old lives were over, and while the future was uncertain, it was at least a chance to start fresh. A few days later, I saw the news. Victor had been arrested, along with several of his associates. Rachel's article had exposed everything: the fraud, the corruption, the threats. The evidence on the USB drive had been enough to bring them all down. But while justice had been served, it came at a cost. Anna and I were ghosts, living under false names in a place where no one knew us. As we settled into our new lives, I couldn't shake the feeling of loss. We had escaped with our lives, but at the expense of everything else. Anna and I were still together, but the scars of what we had been through would never fully heal. And though Victor was behind bars, I knew there were others like him out there. People who thrived on greed and manipulation, who wouldn't hesitate to destroy lives for their own gain. In the end, we survived. But survival came with a price we would carry with us for the rest of our lives. Adjusting to a life in hiding wasn't as simple as leaving our old identities behind. The weight of what Anna and I had been through followed us into every aspect of our new existence. The small town where we'd been placed was quiet and unremarkable, exactly the kind of place where no one asked questions. It was safe, but it was also suffocating. Every interaction with the locals felt like walking on a tightrope, balancing between appearing normal and ensuring we didn't reveal too much. Anna took on a job at a small diner, working long shifts and keeping her head down. I found work at a hardware store, a far cry from my previous career, but it provided enough to cover our modest expenses. We didn't speak about Victor, the USB drive, or the chaos that had consumed our lives. It was as if we had an unspoken agreement to bury the past and focus on survival. But silence didn't mean forgetting, and the tension between us lingered like an uninvited guest. One day, while organizing tools in the back of the hardware store, I noticed a man watching me. He was tall, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face, and lingered just long enough to make me uneasy. When I approached to ask if he needed help, he mumbled something about looking for a specific wrench and quickly left without buying anything. It might have been nothing, but after everything we had been through, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't. That evening, I told Anna about the encounter. Her reaction was immediate. Fear flashed across her face, followed by a determined calm. "You're sure he wasn't just a customer?" she asked, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. "I don't know," I admitted, "but he was watching me." It felt off. Anna's face hardened. "We need to be ready. If they found us, we can't afford to wait and see what happens." The idea that Victor's reach might extend even here wasn't far-fetched. He might have been in custody, but his network was vast, and it wouldn't be hard for someone on the outside to track us down if they knew where to look. We decided to prepare for the worst, packing a bag with essentials and hiding it under the bed, ready to leave at a moment's notice. Over the next few days, we became hyper-vigilant. Every unfamiliar face, every passing car, felt like a potential threat. Anna started taking different routes to and from work, and I began memorizing exits and backroads in case we needed to escape quickly. But despite our precautions, the feeling of being watched persisted. A week later, the unease turned into reality. It was a quiet evening, and Anna and I were sitting on the couch, eating a simple dinner, when the sound of a car pulling into our driveway broke the silence. We froze, exchanging a glance before Anna got up to peek through the curtains. Her face went pale. "It's him," she whispered. "The man you saw at the store." My pulse quickened. I grabbed the bag from under the bed and motioned for Anna to follow me toward the back door. Before we could leave, there was a knock at the front door, loud and deliberate. Whoever it was didn't seem interested in hiding their presence. "Go," I hissed to Anna. "I'll stall him." She hesitated, but the urgency in my voice convinced her. She slipped out the back as I took a deep breath and opened the front door. The man from the hardware store stood there, his face partially obscured by the brim of his hat. He didn't look surprised to see me. "We need to talk," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Who are you?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. He reached into his jacket, and I instinctively tensed. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a badge. "Agent Connor Hayes, FBI. We've been looking for you and Anna." The badge didn't immediately put me at ease. For all I knew, it could have been fake. "If you're FBI, why didn't you approach us sooner? Why the secrecy?" "We had to be sure it was you," he replied. "And we had to be sure you weren't working with Victor anymore." "Anymore?" I repeated, the implication making my stomach churn. "We were never working with him. We were victims." Agent Hayes nodded. "I believe you, but not everyone does. That's why we need your help. Victor's trial is coming up, and the evidence you provided is critical. But it's not enough. We need you to testify." The word testify sent a jolt of fear through me. Testifying meant exposing ourselves, revealing that we were still alive and in hiding. It meant risking everything we had done to stay off the radar. "I can't do that," I said firmly. "If Victor or his people find out—" "They already know," Hayes interrupted. "That's why I'm here. There's been chatter that someone's looking for you. If we don't act now, it's only a matter of time before they find you." The reality of the situation sank in. Hiding had bought us time, but it hadn't guaranteed safety. If Victor's network was still active, we would never truly be free unless he was completely dismantled. But testifying would mean stepping back into the fire. "I need to talk to Anna," I said finally. Hayes nodded. "I'll give you time, but not much. If you agree, I'll make sure you're protected. Witness protection, full relocation. But you have to commit." When Anna returned, I explained everything. She listened in silence, her expression a mix of fear and resignation. When I finished, she looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "We can't keep running," she said. "If this is what it takes to end it, then we have to do it." Her resolve surprised me, but it also strengthened my own. We called Hayes back and agreed to testify. Over the next few days, we were moved to a secure location, our identities once again hidden. The FBI provided us with everything we needed: security, legal counsel, and assurance that we would be protected. The trial was intense. Facing Victor in court, seeing the man who had nearly destroyed our lives, was both terrifying and cathartic. The evidence we provided, combined with our testimony, painted a damning picture of his operations. It became clear that his power had been built on manipulation and fear, and as the trial progressed, his influence began to crumble. When the verdict was finally delivered, guilty on all counts, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Victor was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His network was dismantled, his associates arrested, and his assets seized. For the first time in what felt like forever, we were free. But freedom came at a cost. We couldn't return to our old lives, or even our old names. The FBI relocated us once again, this time with the promise of permanent anonymity. As we settled into our new reality, I couldn't help but reflect on everything we had lost. But we had also gained something invaluable: the chance to rebuild, to start over without fear. Anna and I weren't the same people we had been before, but we had survived. And in the end, that was enough.